Eugene, do you practice with the metronome?
On occasion, yes. I will practice to keep myself, well, only for a minute or two, but certainly not as a regular thing. Mm-hmm. No, definitely not.
You won't
I
practice
use
an
a metronome
hour.
to check, am I rushing here? What's actually happening metronomically? It's interesting, and it keeps me from being bored sometimes when I have to do rock drill sort of practicing.
Mm-hmm. I have here a quote by Henry Piston. Never asked anyone this. I find
Henry Piston.
Walter
Walter
Piston. What did I say, Henry?
Henry.
Walter Piston.
You didn't mean Henry Kissinger, did you?
No. I find there is much more scope for musical expression in a Bach fugue or a Beethoven quartet than in a tone poem purporting to express in detail some philosophical ruminations of Nietzsche.
He's referring to Strauss, knocking Richard Strauss. Well, I think absolutely there's no question, but they're in the Beethoven Sonata, what was the first one? What was his first example?
Or a Bach fugue.
Bach fugue.
Yeah.
In other words, Bach and Beethoven are greater than Richard Strauss. Well, Richard Strauss agreed with Walter Piston because he described himself as a first-rate, second-rate composer, didn't he?
And indeed he
So there's
he
nothing
is that.
He nevertheless is a giant.
He's a giant.
And
I
I'm
mean,
glad
to
we
be
have
in the first...
Nietzsche. I'm glad we have Zarathustra and other things.
But I also...
Is
in
bigger
reading,
than Walter Piston by far.
Oh,
so
sure. But I mean this even in a deeper sense. I mean it in the sense that the abstraction of the Beethoven quartet, the sonata idea, and the contrapuntal genius of Bach, in a way, is more conducive to a more universal expression than any programmatic piece, be it Reflet dans l'eau or...
But you're talking about an exquisite piece.
Yes,
there.
I understand that. I understand that. But is there more room for expression in a Liszt rhapsody or a Chopin ballade, even, as great as that is, as there is in something as pure?
I don't think
abstract.
it has to do with purity. It has to do with quality only. It has to do with quality because the quality in the Chopin ballade is every bit as high as the quality in the Bach fugue or in it's the nature of the expression and the accomplishment of the creator, the level, the standard. You don't need a program, true, but there is a program in Beethoven, throughout Beethoven. That program is that the good will prevail, man will prevail. The major and the triad always wins, and adversity is there, but we triumph and we overcome. So there is a program. There's no difference in Leonora number 3 or in Fidelio. It's the same phrase that goes throughout all of Beethoven. It's that Weltlieb, that all-encompassing positiveness of this incredible genius, and then later on the question and answer, Hamletian dilemma, as it were, because he's always asking philosophical questions, usually as to whether the subdominant and the dominant will finally resolve itself into the tonic. And it's always the same. And what is the incredible effect it has on the human spirit, on our ears, that we listen to this, we know what the answer will be, we're moved beyond words and expression, and somehow it's greater than anything else. And it simply is, will it be or won't it be? Are the good guys going to win? And they do. And we care, and we believe, and we are the ultimate cynics and negativists in our time still, and we need it more than ever. Mm-hmm. But so that's the program. I mean, it's no less of a program than Zarathustra. The Sixth Symphony has a program, and how is it different? Because there's a rainstorm in the middle, or the sun comes out in the last movement. Does that really matter very much?
Mm-hmm. Eugene, do you ever feel as a man who plays music that was written a long time ago, often misplaced in time?
Yes.
Tell me about that. Alienated feeling?
No.
Are you a 19th
No, I
century
think
man?
the world's alienated. I don't think I'm alienated. I think everybody else is crazy, but not me.
Mm-hmm.
I say that, of course,
Sure.
lest you think that I'm serious.
No,
You
you're
never
a
know.
balanced man. You're a balanced man.
You never know, but certainly, I certainly live artistically in another time, while using the vernacular and the things of our own era. Nevertheless, I think I belong sometime before World War I. As any instrumental player, since most of the music that we play has to do with the 19th and 18th century, it's bound to affect us. I don't know which comes first, whether it's the music that makes me an anachronism, or whether it's my being an anachronism that gives me an particular aptitude for a kind of lingo of the turn of the century, or a way of playing that or an understanding of an intimate understanding of this kind of phrasing and vernacular, musical vernacular. But I think that in the younger generation is farther removed from that. You see, I walked around and sat on laps of people who were 19th century people. In fact, one of the closest friends of my life, Casals, whom I knew when I was 23, and I knew him for the last 25 years or longer of his life. He was a 19th century man, absolutely.
And didn't play 20th century music ever, did he?
Yes, he did. He was very contemporary. I mean, he played Ravel and he played this sort of music. He loved Schoenberg. They were very good friends. But he couldn't go along with him after Schoenberg left tonality and went into the serial system. But nevertheless, I mean, he was a person with whom I spent a great deal of time and felt absolutely comfortable, and he felt comfortable with me.
Schoenberg was a 19th century man who departed in another.
Yes.
How did that happen?
Well, I'm certainly, I don't want to, I think it would be very presumptuous of me to make remarks about Schoenberg. I have very strong opinions that it was the wrong route,
false aesthetic
to
system
go. But Schoenberg is a far greater mind than mine, and so I ought to keep my mouth shut about Schoenberg. I have the greatest possible admiration for him, and I don't have a great deal of pleasure in listening to his music after he left the tone system. I have to make it again clear. You can respect enormously and admire someone and be very sorry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have a Slavic background with Zloty. You have a Central European cast of mind in many ways. And you don't put down the Rachmaninoff second, as we were discussing a minute ago about, the form and expression of a Beethoven sonata and so forth. But you must feel, and here may lie another aspect of the alienation, is that a talent like yours would have automatically been conducting, composing, playing chamber music, being part of a whole musical environment instead of a specialization that has, even then they would like to pigeonhole you right now. Oh no, you're a chamber player. Oh no, you're a Russian. Oh no, and so you've had that problem there in this just in the career.
Well, if it may be a problem, but it's also a blessing, isn't it? I mean, to have the problem of not really being viewed as an entire sort of personality. I'm rather surprised because people today do study personalities very carefully, and there's a lot of gossip columning about musicians and artists, and yet this is an aspect in my own career, in my own life, where very few people sum that up. A few have really understood that there are many-fold things, and that's not too usual. That's rather unusual. But it is the way it is. I don't claim any credit for it, but it's just the way it is. But it surprises. Very often I'll play somewhere where I played 10 years ago with Stern and Rose and the trio, and people still will put in the paper the fact, Mr. Istomin, who is less known in these parts for his solo playing than with the. And here I played 2 concerts maybe out of 50 of chamber music, and yet I'll get tagged with that.
Yeah.
Or the reverse. If
Going
I
back
will
to
have
the-
appeared in Pittsburgh playing the Chopin Concerto 5 years ago, then I play the Mozart Concerto, someone will say, well, he's good at 19th century music, but he doesn't understand the Baroque style.
Sure.
And so weiter. It's like that.
But
Silliness.
what about this idea of the specialization now? A list would be a conductor, he'd be a composer, he'd be a pianist, he'd write on music. Today, this danger of the pigeonholing is very bad, I think, don't you?
Well, on the other hand, you do have a plethora now of instrumentalist conductors, don't you? I mean, you have youngsters, many of the youngsters, very gifted ones.
Why
So
is this?
Barenboim is your best example of it.
Yet
Outstanding pianist, outstanding conductor, doing both.
No composing that I
Zuckerman?
know of.
No, composing, no.
Why?
Well, I think...
Musical talent also wants to compose.
I won't compose because nothing that I will... I've tried to compose many, many, many years ago, and what I composed sounded like bad Brahms, so I decided to give up doing that because Brahms did it better than I did.
Might have been good Brahms in
Maybe it
1870.
might have developed into that. Then again, that is the great, great problem of our day, of having to be original all the time. I mean, now the works of one composer, or a painter even, or any of the artists, they seem to be one work. There is what's the word I'm looking for? Instantaneously. I think Andy Warhol described celebrity for 15
Fame
minutes.
for a day,
Fame for a day. And a style has to go through that. I mean, George Crumb is a good example. Here, George Crumb and the Spanish Lorca sounds and the things, the ancient voices of children. Well, now, if he writes a second piece that resembles some of the things in the ancient voice of children, immediately he's accused, and people say, oh, well, he's repeating himself again. Well, yes and no. Rachmaninoff repeats himself, and Beethoven repeats himself, and Mozart repeats himself, but each work is different than the other, and we accept it more readily of the older masters, but today we're very impatient.
Why do you think it came to this?
I don't know, but I think that there's a terrible problem that any composer had coming after the late 18th century and after Wagner. Oh boy, it's quite an act to follow that 100 years. And
That's it, isn't it? The act to follow.
Well, I think so. The la nouveauté and having to say something absolutely different. What was Stravinsky going to do? I mean, he didn't ask himself another super genius. It didn't. Those questions. I'm sure he didn't tear his hair out and say, whatever am I going to do if I want to compose? It just, his mind immediately ruled out this as derivation, and he simply wasn't going to derivate.
Mm-hmm.
And he heard utterly new sound. He was an inventor. Okay,
he was an inventor, but he was a pastiche inventor, though.
Yes. Well,
he came at a time where he could be that. There's no doubt about it. I want to get now into something.
So certainly the cleverest composer.
You said it was a hard act to follow, and in the consciousness of the world. From Wagner's ending in '83, we had another spurt of romanticism in the Impressionists and so forth.
Mahler.
And then it was over. And then by 1910, you had Schoenberg. And then art was doing certain things that Stravinsky had led it into, which many composers became imitative of. Then we had a world war. We had always ranked art as a great thing, and then we came along and we saw Germany slaughter people in a way that no one had ever thought of it. And this fellow Goering, he had an animal outcry. He said, when I hear the word culture, I reach for my pistol. Is there a post-culture shock that we know it was a hard act to follow, but we now basically, and this is why there's a violent punk music and a rock, we hate art. I mean the whole of, and that goes back to your alienation. It's not just that it's a nostalgia to hear a Chopin nocturne. You understand these questions of mine have to be refined down.
Yeah, yes, but I understand what
okay. This is a very important and subtle point.
Well, this may be the victory or the Pyrrhic victory of the revolution, of the industrial and then the democratic revolution. That is, we now are in an equalized society. We're in a society where the masses, where the people who now have the power, their opinions count, their welfare counts, their prejudices count, and their failures count. In that the failure to develop, I mean, the whole idea of the egalitarian society, I mean, in the sense that the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as every individual's inalienable right, is the inalienable right to develop himself into an aesthete, everyone is an elitist. But that's not the way it turns out. Everyone says certain two very obscene words, the second one being you, about, like Goering with a pistol. People so often say, so that's what Beethoven is about, and that's what Michelangelo is about. Well, let me tell you these two words. Give me punk rock and give me hashish or whatever, coke, whatever. That's my trip. This is your little betters, or my parents, or these highfalutin people who are the aristocracy. This and that on the aristocracy. This and that on the values of great painting and so forth. It doesn't mean a damn thing to me.
Punk.
To me is immediate gratification right away. Plug me in.
Pavlov and Orpheus in the commercial on Double Mint.
I think this is terrible.
And you
irony of all these revolutions and all these evolutions of the potential of the individual to sit down and eat nachos in front of a television set with Howard Cosell doing his best to entertain him watching a football game is the end result. For this, these revolutions were made, and to get into three Cadillacs, drink their beer, have their 4 television
Miller
sets.
time.
That's right. If this was the and to descend the English language and the French language into simplistic, vulgar sort of patois, and to deteriorate the quality of one's work, the quality of one's life, to remain insomniac from anxieties born of not having something that someone else has that one wants, and being paranoid about the world is against me, or what, all these sort of modern ailments. If that is the end result of all this,
of Rousseau
social,
and Jefferson,
it would. Well, I think that hopefully not. But there's a great danger of that.
I was just in Florence, and I saw the hatred of the Florentines there, with the hatred of their status art, of Michelangelo, who makes this little town, this little medieval town run, and they're on their motorbikes, and you could see the walls of the streets actually falling down in front of your eyes, the dust coming off, the lack of mufflers, the hatred of the Botticellis in there, and the decadence of the people going to see it like a baseball game, because they have no differentiation any longer of Botticelli or the New York Yankees. So you wonder why, Eugene Istomin, you wonder why it's hard to program the D major sonata.
Indeed.
Instead of a mass of people who grew to even love it more and more, you have less and less.
I'm afraid so. I'm afraid this is true. I'm afraid it certainly wasn't true in the 19th century. The mass of people that literate and that were involved in the music scene were far, far greater than the ratio was far higher than it is today. Now, we haven't got any statistics about that, but it isn't for nothing that T.S. Eliot wrote The Wasteland or Pound Moberly, and this whole post-war thing about the civilization, bitch on what was Pound's line, I can't remember them now, but something about toothless bitch in a state of decay or something, Western civilization.
We'll go to a technical question. Are there areas of technique that you are not satisfied with or are unnatural to your hand?
That's difficult to answer that. Stamina. That's all. I was good facility, but I wish I were 2 inches taller and a little bit stronger.
Really?
Yes.
Well, yeah, Torowitz is smaller than you.
No, he's not. No, he's a little bit taller and a little bit stronger. And so is Sirkin, and so is Rachmaninoff.
Sirkin is taller than you?
Not Hoffman, no, quite a few.
Sirkin's taller than you?
Oh, yes. He makes himself look small because he's always posed in a modest, self-effacing position, but he's really very
Why
big.
would 2 inches taller? You don't think the nervous system?
I think that was make me stronger.
What about
the
girls who
part about playing the piano that I least like is the part that's most characteristic of a pianist. That's all. After all, you want to pound the drums. I used to play that. That's the way they discovered that I discovered that I was interested in the piano, was that I played drums. At the age of 4, I started bang, bang, bang with a kettle drum, and that turned into piano playing. So the percussive aspect of piano playing, I get tired. My fingers hurt when I bang, so I avoid banging. I think, but banging is a fundamental part of piano playing. You have to sort of love to get in there and punch the piano in the stomach until it falls on its knees, as it were.
What about a Martha Argerich? Not as tall or big as you. What are you talking about?
I shouldn't talk about Martha Argerich, although of course I know she's terribly famous and much admired, but I don't know her playing.
Or De La Rocha can make a huge.
I don't know. Well, I didn't say I couldn't make a large sound, but if you ask me a question of what technical problems I have, I don't get a thrill out of playing fortissimo for 5 pages at a time. I don't enjoy it. I like to, and that's part of being a pianist. You know, that's why I've avoided a lot of Liszt. I don't play Liszt, for example. Really? Crashing octaves and things like that. I can do it, but it doesn't. It doesn't. Pianist. It doesn't. Yes. It's funny, but again, Rachmaninoff is an interesting case in point because also he doesn't. Rachmaninoff was not. He was he's an example of that ranginess and bigness, but he wasn't a loud player.
Oh, he wasn't, no.
He was not a loud player. He was an accentuator. He played accents with quicksilver speed and very clear and short accents, always accents. And then he used his dynamics to highlight things so that the effect, he was in a way pianistically getting away. Fritz Reiner was that kind of a conductor. He had the economy of motion, and then just by a flick of an eyelash he could produce a tremendous fortissimo, and the effect of it was much greater in a certain sense than the bigness of broadness of motions. So in that sense I'm more like that than I used to play the Sixth Rhapsody of Liszt, but that was only because it was good for me. It was good for my stamina. It wasn't because I enjoyed doing that. I made myself do it as an exercise to prove that I could do it.
Anievas told me he now works out constantly. I said, how come? So he can play the Rachmaninoff third. He can't do it without working out.
Well, there's a good point to that. It's the most fatiguing. Yes.
So many women then don't have the power to play certain works.
That's true. I think it's very much a drawback. I think that women's physical limitations are a drawback. That
to
doesn't
certain
mean that
works.
there's a lot of music. Well, there's another drawback. There's a psychological drawback. Almost all the great music is written by men. Don't forget, ladies are supposed to play the Chopin and the Schumann because of Clara Schumann. People think that, but Schumann was a man, and Clara had to get into his skin and did surely. But these are music by men, and there is some.
Well, this
subtlety.
is very interesting now because Clara Schumann hated Liszt a banger. And said he has the decline of piano playing on his conscience.
Interesting.
Now, Liszt, who knew Schumann and played for him, and Schumann was crazed over those interpretations, loved them, said, they're not how I even imagined them, but they're wonderful. When he heard Clara say, I have the decline of piano playing on my conscience, his retort was, if you want to hear Schumann played as he should be played, don't listen to Clara.
Interesting.
Well, this is a very interesting.
That's.
There is a psychological problem here that you have to get into the skin of a man, and women and men are different.
They are different, yes, and that doesn't
Not
mean
only
that,
physically.
No, that is one comes from the other. I don't know which. They certainly are equally involved in this differential, but certainly the physical is paramount in this difference, but also I don't know whether today this will be true anymore because now there's only the physical difference. Now socially, even psychologically, the woman as the breadwinner and all these things, we're getting into very broad subjects here, but
they make people think.
Yes. I don't think that I would be too good at singing Violetta in Traviata, but if I had a good voice, I would be credible as Germont or as Alfredo, right? I mean, you wouldn't expect a man to play Ophelia very well unless he were Marcel Marceau or some genius who was able to play to fit into any role. But there are things which are also, by the same token, there are works by composers which can be of a feminine sort of nature. That is the composer, in fact, creating an Ophelia in a composition, or creating
the feminine second theme
in a
sonata.
Jocasta or whatever it is in the work. In fact, they did it and do it. It doesn't mean that a woman cannot play Bach or Mozart or Chopin or what have you. But then there are certain works where the woman has to become a man and the man has to become the woman. But for the most part, the composers are almost invariably pianists, and they're invariably men. So we do have an inside track, let us put it this way. It doesn't mean that we necessarily have a better record. It doesn't mean that there are not great women musicians.
Of course, Rachmaninoff said that he composed his third concerto not for man or woman, but for elephants.
Did he say that?
Yes. Well, you make your living with your hands. And do you ever think about them? First of all, are your hands sensitive to surfaces?
Yes, very sensitive.
Anton
and
Rubinstein.
I suffered from that a great deal. I
Really?
do, yes. And I have suffered from plastic keyboards, which I've had to play in the last 30 years because of Steinway Piano Company, which is my most beloved. I wouldn't dream of playing. I mean, the sound of the piano, to me, is a Steinway piano. I'm not doing this as a plug for them, but they're like my family. I mean, my conception of what a piano sounds like is the modern Steinway. And at a certain point, because of production and because of the difficulty of obtaining ivory, and now it's illegal to import ivory, they put plastic on the keyboards, and I've been having a terrible time. I have an allergy to to the touch of plastic, and also I slip on it terribly, so it obliges me to have to rough it up with steel wool and create all kinds of artificial
So you
responses
go
to
a
this
little
material.
crazy here. It's tough stuff.
Oh, very
to the
much
eye.
so,
Okay.
very much so. And I'm terribly happy when I can find a
Ivory.
Steinway with an ivory keyboard.
Are you nervous about your hand?
Very
Eugene?
much, very well. I'm not nervous about my hands. I'm more nervous about that aspect
Uh-huh.
of it, and I'm not happy with that effect, because piano playing is such a tactile. It's an extension of one's body, and
Yeah.
when there's this alien sort of surface, it's a challenge and a problem.
In our society, we're often deprived, of tactile sensation. When you're away from the piano, let's say you're not really interested in playing anything for a few days, you're tired or whatever, but do you start missing just the feel, since you have sensitive surfaces, the feel of the figurations, because each composer, of course, is so different? You miss like playing a Schubert left hand, or not the music as much as the touch.
Yes, I think now more than in the past. When I was younger, I used to be
Keep
very happy to get away from the piano for a few days or even a few weeks at a time. I miss music, I think, more than the other thing.